Welcome back to the Coaching Culture Podcast. This episode, it's the second part of our live Q&A with coaches. And in today's episode, we're going to be answering questions on giving feedback to assistant coaches and administrators. What do we do when we are not aligned with our club, our athletic department, or front office when it comes to the mission and vision? And we're going to field a question around what's our responsibility as coaches for the athlete's experience. Now, if you are new to the podcast, well, my name is JP Nerbun, and I'm joined by my friends and co-hosts, Nate Sanderson and Betsy Butterick, as well as some amazing listeners of the podcast that joined us for this live Q&A. The mission of this podcast is to help leaders grow and build a better team culture. If you'd like to learn more about myself or Betsy and our work as leadership coaches, head on over to tocculture.com and betsybutterick.com. We've both got free resources and online courses that can be hugely beneficial for yourself, your own development, as well as your organization. Which is one of the big topics of this episode here is how do we really make an impact with wherever we are coaching or leading. Now, let's get into the second part of our live Q&A. All right, 3 questions down, 3 more to go. Let's get into the second half of the conversation here. We've got next up, drum roll, Colleen. Come on here, down, Colleen.
Hello.
Come on down.
Come on down. Here we go. All right. Colleen, good friend and of mine there, and we're excited to have you here. What's on your mind here? What questions you got coming up for you?
Yeah, I think a big thing for me that I've been working on and constantly trying to grow in is giving feedback to my staff, right? So I became a head coach. I was relatively young. So Brennan, I understand totally where you're coming from in that sense. And being able to give feedback, like I'm good at giving feedback to student athletes, people that are younger than me, that's easy. It's like the peer-to-peer feedback when you're in a role as a head coach. I really struggle with that. And then on the same side of that, how do you kind of like up that and give feedback to your higher ups, right? Your boss, your administrator, when you're trying to implement this change, like Mackenzie was talking about.
If we only had a communication specialist on this podcast.
Gosh, I wish we knew one. That would be really helpful right now. So Colleen, I'll take a hint from JP there and dive into this one. First of all, I always joke, feedback is everyone's favorite F word. And I know Nate might have one that's more preferred in front of feedback, but it's tough. It can be tough. And it's such an opportunity. And I like to think of this idea of, what we don't know can't hurt us, and what we don't know can't help us. And so for me, especially for someone in your position, modeling that openness, that receptivity, the mindset or perspective of feedback is a gift, even if it's hard to hear, and sometimes it is. So being intentional about asking for feedback from the coaches that you work with to set the example of this is how we can choose to receive feedback, creating intentional pathways for that to happen organically. And then when you notice something about their coaching that you want to talk about, before you ask. So I might ask, when you said this, like, what were you going for there? Or help me understand what was the purpose or your intention. And then once they state that, using any phrase like, I wonder if, or I'm curious if, or where my mind goes, like just starting to offer something that might be something they take, might be something that they decide not to act on, but you've created an awareness. For me, a lot of feedback is about creating awareness, because awareness is a prerequisite for change. It's unlikely someone is going to change something that they're not first aware of. So for me, when it comes to feedback, the question top of mind is, how do I help this person generate a greater awareness about the way this is showing up and the impact that it has on others? Same thing for the higher ups is, if I know that something's an issue, but they're my boss and like, who am I to say this thing to them? It's going to start with awareness. So, I wanted to have a conversation with you because of something that I noticed. I'm not sure if you're aware. When you said this in the meeting the other day, I noticed a few people looked away or smiled or laughed. And I'm wondering what that's about. Just opening the door before we give the direct feedback. There's going to be certain times or circumstances where you need to be more clear and direct. And when those come up, setting the expectation of this is one of those times. Like normally I would ask for your input on this. This is one of those times where I'm going to give you some feedback and I'm going to ask for you to be open and receptive because, and then you insert whatever the purpose or reason is, and then giving them the feedback. and then asking for follow-up. Sometimes we tell them like, hey, you need to be on time more consistently. Okay. And they say, okay. But we don't ask another question that allows them to take accountability or agency in that process, to apply the feedback and actually make it work. So if I said like, hey, you need to be on time more consistently, what's it going to take for you to do that? And now they're telling me instead of just nodding their head and saying, okay. So a variety of ways you can open the door. But for me, it often starts with awareness, and awareness is often led by a question.
Colleen, when you think about giving feedback, like oftentimes our mind goes to the worst case scenario. What's that worst case scenario of giving feedback to one of your coaches?
That they're not going to like me. I struggle with that big time as a coach. That they're not going to listen to the feedback that I'm giving, and then it's going to create kind of like a divide in our staff.
Yeah. So like staff dysfunction, the dislike. And when you think about giving feedback to a superior, someone that like an administrator, what's that fear? What's that worst case scenario in that picture?
Definitely similar of like the not being liked, not being respected, maybe overstepping my boundary because I am pushy as well. So trying, yeah, you laughed, JP, that's right. I'm so trying to like not just stay in my lane and not overstep where I don't need to overstep.
Yeah, I think sometimes just being aware of what's coming up for us in these conversations when you feel that you have something to share with somebody else, and just say, okay, I feel like I could give them feedback that could help them and help the team, that can help the organization. Um, and just naming that fear and then just going, is that true? Right? Is that true? And how could I know that it's true? And just trying to explore that. I think so much is like of giving effective feedback comes to our own blocks, and just being aware, putting those out on the table and going, okay, this is what's keep getting in the way of me. Like we create reasons that we don't get feedback because they'll get upset. Have conflict. They won't accept it. When really the block for us giving feedback is what's happening right between like my head or in my heart. And so just being present with that and knowing that can unlock, you being able to step into that. And just end of the day, like it's going to take courage, right? By anybody to step in and give feedback, especially to a superior. The only other practical thing I would say is just like, can you establish agreements beforehand? Like oftentimes, like it's in any relationship. Do we want to have a relationship where we speak candidly and openly to each other? We share our truths, our feelings, and our thoughts. And the more that we can establish those types of relationships, the better. Like it's going to be a little bit easier to step into that space for us. But first off, you got to check in with what's coming up for you. It's just the thought of giving this person feedback.
Thank you.
I'd add
one more thing. Yeah, Nate, go. You add things first.
Colleen,
I've already added things.
I'm conflict averse, and Luther can appreciate this. I'm high blue in terms of my personality profile, which means, I'm a big time feeler. And so I don't even like thinking about those conversations because they make me feel icky on the inside. But one of the things, as I've kind of reflected on that a little bit, and we've had some situations where we're trying to get more alignment in our program right now, is that I look at that and think, what do I not understand about this person? And so instead of like this feeler, part of me that's really an obstacle for me in having these conversations, I've kind of turned a little bit to lean into that and say, okay, how can I be more curious? Like as a means of connection for a coach that, let's say, is doing things in practice that we would never do at the varsity level. I don't understand why, because I don't understand what they're thinking. The story I tell myself is this guy doesn't understand what we're doing. But the reality is, like, I don't understand where his philosophies that are leading him to do these things that we're not doing. So first off, for me to really be able to identify what's the divide or what's the issue or what's the misunderstanding or what part does he not get, I have to understand him or her better. And that's a place where I can lean into my strengths a little bit more in those conversations by being curious, and trying to really understand their thought process that led to whatever those behaviors are that I'm concerned about, because that also allows me to respond better, because whatever conclusions I have jumped to prior to the meeting may or may not be accurate. So I'm also searching for some evidence to figure out if I'm telling the right story or not. And if not, then I have to make an adjustment to figure out where the communication breakdown is happening, which very well, most of the time is my fault. I'm certainly complicit in it, but I don't know that until I ask and ask and ask to better understand first.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. And just to follow up on Nate's two things Nate said that I think are really helpful for feedback conversations. One, the curiosity. Help me understand is a phrase I often use, like help me understand, and then I'll insert whatever the context or challenge might be that I'm prepared to give feedback on. And then the second is taking ownership, looking actively for opportunities to take ownership for some way that I've contributed, even if it's passively, to the issue existing in the way it currently does. So if I say, help me understand, and they give me an example, and then I say, okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I'm going to lead with gratitude and say, I realize that I haven't been as clear as I could have been about my expectations for how we handle these situations, and that's on me. And then give them the feedback. So modeling that ownership, that vulnerability, that leadership prior to giving the feedback. And then the last part, whenever possible, being really intentional about separating the person from the behavior. Because sometimes feedback is hard for people to take in, let alone apply, because it in some way makes a judgment about who they are as a person. And that causes defensiveness right away. So being like, there's a difference between you're a selfish person versus you made a selfish choice. These are different things. The choice is an opportunity they have to do over again. The selfish person, that's a judgment that I'm making about them. So asking, with what I plan to say, what will they likely make it mean? Like, what's the meaning that they might extrapolate from the feedback that I have to offer? And how do I want to adapt my words in order to clarify the thing that there's an opportunity to work on, separate from maybe a judgment being made about that person?
The question I have for you, Colleen, is like, all right, we just threw a bunch at you. Like, what are 2 or 3 things that are sticking with you that you're like, all right, I need a, if I just took 2 or 3 things from all the sage, wise advice we just dropped, what would be those 2, 3 things?
Yeah, I think leaning into the uncomfortability of it, right? Like I'm similar to Nate where I'm a feeler and I'm seeing how people react and seeing if I'm being judged. And I don't want to feel like people are mad at me and I don't want to feel like I'm mad at people. And so leaning into that of like the uncomfortability of it. And then I think starting with the questions, right? Like it's a reflective on me. How do you start asking the questions and how do you lead with curiosity? I know JP, we worked on before like mutual expectations. So going into conversations, being able to say like, okay, we mutually agreed that we're going to give each other feedback so we can continue to get better. So I think leading with that as well.
Yeah, and I it's one thing to have those expectations and to have those agreements, but then you have to reference them back. Like I was literally in a meeting with a CEO and his leadership team like 2 months ago, and we were literally, it was written on the wall like the next 2 days on this offsite, we are going to be speaking truth, right?
Mhm.
And like this moment, this one woman had to give another, like the CFO, feedback, and like sweat was literally pouring out of her face. She was so stressed about it. And we're all like, just say it. She's just say it. She's like, I don't want to say it.
Yeah.
And it's so stinking hard. It's just all these little things are really, really key. But withholding, not sharing truths can be so detrimental to culture. So it's a great question. Such a great question.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. All right. We're going to go with Patrick next. I'm making my guy Luther over here wait, which is probably killing him because he just loves bringing energy and enthusiasm in here. So we'll hold off on you, Luther, here. But Patrick, yeah, welcome. Glad you made it here today. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Similar to Mackenzie's question, but in terms of like how to get your administration on board with creating a transformational culture where you have a lot of individual success and individual teams, but these teams kind of operate in silos.
Mm. Yeah, well, one thing is to send them the podcast from Joe Brown that was on this last few weeks, because Joe Brown was absolute dynamite as an AD, and that's definitely one to share out there and put that out in the world, because he's done an amazing job with that. But I can definitely feel the struggle. Like not every administration is going to have the same enthusiasm as we are as a coach. But what I hear in you is like you want to operate in a place where there is alignment. There is alignment around some sort of shared, mission or vision within what we're trying to do with athletics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want like the best for all the players that are that are playing athletics and having a similar experience. I think is really important within a school environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Betsy and Nate, you got some thoughts?
I'm all about phrasing in the positive whenever possible. And yet I acknowledge there's opportunities to take a different route and to start with pain points. Or if we don't do this, what might we likely experience? So sometimes with administrators specifically that might be more entrenched in, sort of that siloed comfort or way of letting people operate. What do we stand to lose if kids at our school are having wildly different sport experiences depending on the sport that they play or the coach that they work with? Like, because their friends outside of their respective sports are on different teams, but their parents talk, the community talks. Like, if the sport experiences are radically different because we've allowed different organizations or teams to operate in silos, what do we stand to lose, or what problems might we run into without that alignment, without that shared purpose, without that foundation? So if it's beneficial, I think addressing what might be problematic if we don't take steps to create that alignment, or if we don't lean into more of best practices related to coaching, can sometimes be a starting point for conversation that gets attention and warrants a different level of seriousness or exploration than if we simply said, yeah, it'd be great if we all did this thing. It would be, but that's less motivating for certain people, depending on their role or what's important to them.
Yeah, Patrick, I think we're kind of going through this right now in our athletic department of trying to figure out what brings us together. So we have 16 different head coaches. We have an incredible amount of success. All of our fall sports finished in the top 4 at the state level this year, and won a state championship and, whatever. So there's this feeling that, well, what I do works, let me do my job. And our ID will say that, like, my job's to, empower you guys and stay out of the way and let you do what you're best at. And that's great. But what we're finding and what we're kicking around in our athletic department meetings is, but what happens when Coach Sanderson and Coach Willems both want to do something on the same day or use the same players, or, we're continuing to demand more and more in the off season, and kids are getting pulled in all these directions, and then families are getting upset and kids are getting burned out. And, so I think Betsy's idea here of the pain point, if you take this forever, and everybody's just allowed to do their own thing, first of all, what position does that put kids in and families in sometimes? Because I think that ultimately is the clientele we're trying to serve here, right, through sport. And it also can make it difficult sometimes from one coach to another, and Brennan can identify with this too, where there's high standards, or he's trying to implement high standards in football, and then it might change in basketball, and then it might change in baseball, and so that makes it, for the guy that's trying to hold the line, it's really hard to be the only one. And I don't know that everybody always appreciates that, the guy that's out in front in the trenches, that's really trying to raise standards while everyone else is content to just do the way, things the way that they've been done. But it should benefit everyone, right? If Brennan's holding higher standards and then the basketball coach comes along and then the baseball coach comes along, it should be better for the athletes. It should allow the coaches to be better, right, for their kids as well. But it's hard, and those conversations are hard, and you have to have the right administrator, I think, that can navigate those. But I think, again, focusing on player experience, consequences for players and families when everybody's kind of going rogue is a place to start.
This might be a little bit of a weird question, Patrick, but like, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being this is like really, really, really important to you. Like, you cannot coach if you are not a part of a program, a club, or an organization that does not share the same mission and vision as you. And then on a scale of 1 being, you know what, I'm totally fine. Like, put me in anywhere. I'll coach anywhere. Just give me a team, a ball, and a whistle, and off I go. Right? Where would you put this as for you?
For me personally, I would. I mean, I love coaching, so I'll coach whoever they'll let me coach. But having a shared value, I'd put it at like a 7 or an 8.
Yeah, like it's still. And so what's so important about that in that 7 or 8? Like, obviously there's the frustrations, like Nate just mentioned there, on standards, and like that creates issues for you. But like, is there something else that's really like important about having that shared vision?
Yeah, I think just being a part of a school, and kids are coming to our school expecting this experience, and if for us to give it to them at like kind of piece together and not having a similar experience, I think is kind of taking away from them.
Hmm. Yeah, and so you just have a deep care for the other kids and the kids in the school as a whole. Like, you're part of this organization, and you just see like, hey, like, we could be doing more for these kids here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I sense in that is like, yeah, this great care to go beyond your own team. And so what I would say in that is like, explore administration, right? Like, I mean, there's obviously encourage people, but like there also may be a role for you to do this work at a bigger level because you have the heart for it, you have the interest for it. And we need more administrators that really value this. And that's not to say you can't work but I think Nate and Betsy just gave you plenty of great things. But I think you should also start to have the conversation of, you know, might I have gifts and interests that could be serving more people in other ways? And
Mhm.
obviously, I came to that question in 2017. I could have stayed just in coaching, but I said, okay, let's go find a way where I can go and help other coaches. So, um, yeah, I would just maybe start to think about that as well too.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thanks, Patrick.
absolutely. Yeah. All right, we've got one last man here to go. A question for Luther, and then we're going to I have a question for everybody here in the group. So, everybody get ready. But Luther, welcome. What do you
Yeah,
got for
thank you.
us?
Well, I am taking an opportunity to kind of move up from middle school sports, which practices just a couple times a week and has lots of kids, and moving up to a JV girls basketball coaching job. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to have more time, maybe dive a little bit deeper on a certain aspects of coaching and working with the girls. And so just kind of curious, I've taken lots of great notes so far. It's been fabulous. So that kind of leads into my question, like, what are some of the most important nuggets of information as I think about the kids and the parents and myself and any other coaches that I'm working with? Like, where can I start? Where does it begin? What are the most important steps for me to take in order to develop a program with my kids that really helps to develop it and have this transformational experience that you all have been talking about for so many years.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing in that, Luther, is that you've got a situation now where you're going to have more hours with your athletes. You're going to have more, with that, you see more potential impact, more potential opportunities to have impact. And that's all. First off, just commend you on that view because I think that's just right. You're coming at it from the right mindset. Um, when you look at how you've done things to the past and how you want to elevate and maybe what you do want to start to change, like what is most important for you to start to grow at and improve as you move from this middle school level to the JV level?
Yeah, I think with this extra added time, I'm really interested in the leadership aspect. How can I help develop leaders with this group of however many I get, 10, 15 girls, leadership skills, and give them opportunities to learn and grow that way alongside with the basketball skills and the game knowledge and, teamwork skills and just becoming wonderful, continuing to become wonderful human beings as well as the leadership kind of aspect.
Yeah. Well, I'll go first here and then let Betsy and Nate share. But, I would just say i- as you're moving up a level, the challenge is going to be greater. So prepare them for that challenge, prepare the parents for the challenge. The expectations are going to be higher. And hopefully you as a coach can be more demanding, right? At this point, right?
Mhm.
As you move up levels. But I don't think we oftentimes start or communicate that early enough. And so then all of a sudden we throw people in and it's a challenging situation. We're starting to get competitive. Not everybody gets equal playing time, things like that. And it's more uncomfortable. And a positive experience starts to look a little bit different for some people. So sometimes positive experience and growth happens through adversity. So I think that's just one thing. It would be just start to prepare people for the high amounts of challenge, start to really invest in the support. The more support you can give them, especially as you're going to that age group where you're going in through adolescence, like you're going to need more support. That's not just you, that's assistant coaches, that's parents, and that's their teammates. So really engaging parents and how they can support their growth, but also to your third point, which is around, your point, which is around developing. How do I develop leaders? Really, the best way to develop leaders, in my opinion, is to let them lead, to actually trust them, give them responsibility, let them go lead in different aspects of the program in significant ways, let them fail, and then continue to support and challenge them in that. And one way to do that is how they support each other. So I think really just those would be some places I might start.
Great, thanks.
Nate, I won't fight you to see who goes next. So what comes up for me first, I want to echo back Luther. I love your intention. You're so intentional about, okay, I have this opportunity. Things are going to be different. I want it to be exceptional. I'm looking to create a really positive experience in a variety of ways. So commend you on your intention. And I think that is also really important for the new players and parents to understand in your program. Your intention is to do these things. And while this is a new experience, this is what you have planned, and we'll adapt the plan and learn together as we go. What comes up for me is the sooner and more clearly you can make yourself known to your players and to your parents. Because when we have shared understanding, when we have information about someone or something, there's less assumptions made. There's less jumping to conclusions. There's less miscommunication. So while it will be a time-intensive quest to get to know all of your new players, to get to know their families, one thing that you can do to expedite the process is to think about the ways that you want yourself to be known, both to your players and to your parents. When they have a better understanding of you, now we can start to work together in more collaborative ways. The other thing that comes up for me when we talk about leadership, especially for young girls, understanding that not everyone may want to be a leader or occupy that role. And I think that anybody can be a leader. And I've also learned that not everyone has the desire to lead. And so what are my own expectations as a coach about leadership and what that looks like? And where am I making space intentionally for those that maybe don't have a strong desire to lead, to be exceptional followers or teammates? Even switching the word from leadership to advocates. Like, I want to teach young women how to be great self-advocates. That we know is a leadership quality, and that involves certain skills that we could qualify as leadership skills. So thinking about with this age group, with this gender, even when it's appropriate, what's a really important skill to help them develop? And then how can I tie in what I'd like to teach about leadership, even for those that maybe don't self-identify as a leader or have a strong desire to lead? Like, how can it be inclusive and intentional in that way as well?
Yep. That's awesome. That's great.
Luth, I'll hit you with a few things here too. I think, the question that comes to mind for me is just what's most important to you. Like, you have to have clarity around that. And I think it really manifests in three ways. One, what is your purpose in coaching for you, for Luther, right? And because that's what you're going to be serving, Secondly, just in the culture, there's a million things you can do. There's a million different values that you can grab hold of, but what's most important to you? And then third, when it comes to just a style of play, like, you have to be able to answer that question a little bit too. Are we going to keep the other team from scoring? Are we going to try to score as many points as we can? What really matters to you? And if it was me, starting in that place, is in each of those three categories, first, just do a brain dump. All the things that come to mind when it comes to purpose, just jot. Same thing with culture, same thing with style of play. And then do the stacking exercise, that we've done at a couple of our TOC retreats, where you just look at that list and say, okay, head to head, when it comes to taking great shots or no straight line drives to the basket, which is more important to me? Taking great shots. So that's 1 and 2. Now I grab the next one, and it's just trying to figure out for you the things that are most important and how to serve those. Last thing I'll add here, when it comes to leadership, I was really challenged when we interviewed Shaka Smart, and he talked about, I coach my team and I coach the players on my team. And those two things are different. And one of the things that I've just continued to lean into more and more over the last couple of years is, I feel like, at least with our varsity kids right now, at least our first 7, and I'm working on number 8, is that I have an ongoing conversation that has lasted 2 years now, where I may not talk to every kid every day or touch base with them or see them every day, especially in the off season. But particularly, I know what's going on in their life on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So it's not weird, like, to see them at the concession stand in the summertime at a softball game and be like, hey, what's going on? Like, I know they were just playing, in Chicago 2 weeks ago, or that they're working this job, or, they just got their license or whatever it might be. So, like, that, just creating that continual dialogue opens up a million possibilities for other reflective questions. Like, then you can follow up and say, that situation that happened in the game the other day where, 2 guys ran into each other and then we just looked out of sorts. What do you think we could have done differently there? And now you're putting some reflective pieces into that conversation that are oriented toward leadership without saying, for you to be a leader in this situation, you have to do X, Y, and Z. It's really about asking the right questions and finding context where, based on their experience, where they can start to reflect on what we could have done differently or what they could have done differently. So whatever you can do, obviously those relationships are key and you're great at that, but an ongoing dialogue, it's amazing the power that you can have to influence in a kid's life just by having some idea of what's going on and off the court with them.
Great. Thank you so much, Nate. I really appreciate all the feedback and the comments here from you all.
Luther, let's flip it. You've got, let's say a friend of yours is in coaching. They call you, say, Luther, I'm about to go coach a JV team. What's your piece of advice for them?
I think a few things, like being prepared. Number one, like I've got a couple months left, so I before we start coaching, so letting my friend know, like, get prepared and find out why you want to coach and what you want for yourself and for the culture of the team, and start getting to know the kids even possibly before the season starts. Like, get around the high school, get around the cafeteria, sporting events, whatever, and start to build some relationships with some of those kids that you might, run into or who might come out for the team. But I think the big takeaway for me is what are my intentions, and to be prepared with those and sit down and give myself plenty of time to kind of plan that out. I love that idea, that stacking exercise, and in those three areas, and just have it laid out for myself, give myself time to get ready for the upcoming season.
That's fantastic. Great advice there. We'll have to get you back here. I love that. So I want to finish up with today asking you all something that's been on my mind, especially this morning as I was going through some edits on, and we did Nate and Betsy did a recording with a guest talking about anti-fragility, and a lot of the things that the words that I heard around there was just this experience for the athletes. And I think the experience of athletes and is become more and more set, on the focus by society, right? We talk about the athlete's experience. I think even as transformational coaches, we really want to have our athletes to have a positive experience. And yet I'm going, what does it actually mean to have a positive experience? Right. And listening to anti-fragility, it's like so much, there's a lot of questions I had around what that actually means. So here's my request out of everyone here. And we'll just have you put your hand up there and jump around here, because I know some people will take maybe a little bit more time to think about it. But I just want everyone to kind of make a statement, 1 or 2 sentence statement, which I know is going to be challenging, but make a statement about the coach's responsibility for their athletes having a positive experience. Just make a statement, around the coach's responsibility for creating a positive experience for their athletes on the team. Any takers to start off with? Go on, Brennan.
Yeah, I can start. I think it's the coach's responsibility to set up the avenues to have a good experience from the athlete's perspective. Giving those opportunities to create a positive experience and promote a positive experience. And, at that point, I think that you kind of shift it and give the athlete, after you've given those opportunities, it becomes their responsibility to kind of run with those experiences and make the most of them. Like whatever it might be. Nate gave me a great idea for our end of the year banquet, where we kind of have like voiceovers of the kids talking about what their experience was like this year and everything during the highlight reel and everything. And, all their responses revolved around the relationships they built. And there wasn't a lot of the wins and losses. They didn't mention much of that. It was more of the relationships and their experience as a whole was enjoyable. And I think that's attributed to just setting up those avenues for them to find good experiences and build relationships. But it was all on them to actually create those experiences. You know, we set up situations where they could create the experiences, but then it fell on them to go from there.
Yeah. So you're talking about creating the conditions for them to have a positive experience, but they got to step in and take that responsibility. What I love that you shared there, that activity or that retreat thing, or at the end of the year you did with the players, was you got them to reflect on what is actually special about this experience. And sometimes I think if we don't ask them to reflect on what they hope that experience to be like, they won't become aware of what's actually most important. So that's beautiful. All right, who's up next? Colleen.
Yeah, so I agree with what Brennan said as well. Like the relationship piece, I think is really important. And I think as coaches, you get to like co-create that with your team, with your staff of like how they're going to show up every day in practice, how you're going to show up every day in practice. And for me, it's been a journey of like putting other stuff aside, whether I'm frustrated, how I show up when I'm with the student athletes is how they're going to walk away from their experience, right? So similar to having children, right? However you react to a situation, they're going to react the same way. And so I think just knowing that as a coach, that you have such an impact, whether you're with them for 1 day a week or 5 days a week or 7 days a week, that you're really going to have an impact on those kids and they're going to look to you for guidance and support. Ideally for me, you know, like I came from college coaching. Now I'm at the high school level. So I'm with these kids hopefully for 4 years of their life. And I want them to graduate. And at the end of those 4 years, be like, that was the best 4 years. I want to go do that all over again. And not that it's always going to be easy and they're going to have to work hard and push each other. And they're not always going to like me or like each other. There's going to be things that pop up. But having those relationships that they can fall back on is really important. And I think another piece of it is, as well as like the balance, right? We can all get so focused on our own sport of what we need to be really good at and trying to make sure that they have balance in their lives. I always value that as a college coach. Like you need to have the academic side of things, you need to have the social side of things, and then you need to have the athletic side of things. You really need to have all three in that wheel to be able to really enjoy your sport. And as coaches, we get really wrapped up in like only our sport. How can we get better at our sport? How much time can we be taking from them? But I think realizing like they need that balance as well to really enjoy what they're doing.
Oh, I love that. That's great.
Mine is kind of similar to that. And then like, I feel like your coach's responsibility for a positive experience, I kind of relate to my own, like it's my responsibility to give myself a great positive experience. Like, you know, there's 100 crazy things that go on throughout a season. And like, it's my responsibility to bring that energy, come prepared to practice, have a good attitude about whatever it may be, and have, you know, responsibility to be this transformational person to give them that experience. So I think if I bring that, especially I'm a middle school girl teacher or coach, and like if I bring that, they typically will follow suit.
Great point, Mackenzie.
Yeah, wise words, Mackenzie. And I would say, I think the coach is responsible for creating the container, whether it's in our training, whether it's in a one-on-one conversation. A coach's responsibility is for creating the container that can hold the potential for that experience, that can hold whatever comes up in that space. And in order to build a great container for whatever the situation happens to be, the best material I've found for building that is curiosity. Like, am I actively looking for what can I learn? How can I do this differently? Like, what didn't I know? Because I think a lot of times, especially as coaches, by nature of our position, we are tasked to know and to impart that knowledge on other people. And because we know, we miss opportunities sometimes to learn or to be an active participant in the learning that's available in the containers that we occupy. So I would say coach's responsibility to build the container. And then in order to build the best container, to be continually curious.
Patrick, go on.
Yeah, kind of going off of that, I think it's also important that the coaches are like transparent and why they're doing the certain things. And like the 3 words I wrote down for a great experience would be like kids feel included, feel connected, and feel heard. And I think that would present a great experience for them. and why you're doing each of those, and why you're doing certain activities for the team that might not be related to your sport, but you're trying to help them grow that way.
Mm. Beautiful. Luther.
One thing that I haven't heard anyone say in this experience is to win a championship or win lots of games. And it brings me to the thing that many of you talked about in the past, is controlling what we can control. Because we can't control the outcome of a game, but we can control all that goes into it. And the practices and the social outings and the conversations and the connections and the relationships and things like that. I think reminding and remembering that we need to control the things that we can control, and we can almost guarantee a positive experience that way. If you put in the work and have the conversations ahead of time with parents and kids, and you're clear on your expectations and your goals, and you develop some of those together as well too. If we take the winning piece out of it, it's reminiscent of a choir, or my daughter was in the musical this year. It was an amazing, wonderful, positive experience for her because they worked hard, they were together, they were relationships, and then they put on these two performances, and voila, it was glorious. And I wonder, why can't we do that for sports as well too?
Mm. Oh, beautiful as well there. We've got Todd and Nate left.
All right. So our vision statement is to be the best part of every athlete's day. And we do this by one of our core values, which is joy, right? We play with joy and we rejoice in the success of others. And I think my organization is pretty well known for having a good culture. And we do that by rejoicing in the success of our teammates, right? Because their success is our success, right? And if you have that environment, I think where there is true rejoicing in your teammates, it becomes a very positive environment, and people want to be in that environment, right? So that's what we work really, really hard on.
I love the clarity on that there, Todd. That's great.
You know, JP, I think if I would answer this question 6 months ago, I would have said we create the conditions for good things to happen. You know, we till the soil, we make sure that there's water, but I mean, the seeds have to do the growing. I think I would change that a little bit now, just in terms of our experience over the last couple of years, where we've really leaned into this idea that I think my job is to facilitate the co-creation of an experience that is the best part of our athlete's day. It's not just up to me. I can't do it by myself. And players have to understand it's a responsibility that they have for each other. And so that's really the first question we start with at our very first meeting is, if this thing is going to become the best part of your day, what do we have to do for each other for that to happen? What do you need from me? Here's what I need from you. And we follow up on that as we go along through the season. But if I'm showing up, JP, to make sure that this is a great experience for you and you're doing the same for me, that's when really special things can happen.
The only thing I could add to all this, I think, is, you know, back on Luther's point that like winning is so out of our control. Playing time is even largely out of players' control. Performance, they're going to be up and down. So those three things in of itself are not going to be consistent across seasons or even in a season, as well as getting along. Like, we're going to have some teams that gel and people really like each other, and some of us are just throwing up a group of players and they have so much other drama that existed before we got them, right? And so even when it comes to players getting along, like there's only so much we can do. And so I love your point there, Nate. I think what we can do for every athlete is to try to help them to reframe what is a positive experience, and that maybe there is some challenge, maybe there's a difficulty, maybe they've had an injury, maybe they don't really like their teammates, maybe we're in a losing season, you know, whatever that be, to reframe that as, hey, how could this be a gift? How could this be a gift, an opportunity for me to become the person I want to be? And I think that those are the seasons when you're in that's, you know, it's easier in winning seasons to create that positive experience. You know, it's easier when a player's playing well to help them to feel good about it. But can you help them to still make it a positive experience even when it's in those valleys? And I think that's a great challenge for us as coaches. This has been an incredible conversation. So everybody give yourself a round of applause for a phenomenal phenomenal participation. You all get gold stars. We're very proud of you here for being on the Coaching Culture podcast. It was a lot of fun. Betsy, Nate, you got anything before we sign off here today?
Just gratitude. Thank you, everyone. Part of what I love about communication and conversation is there's always an opportunity to learn, and every conversation provides something that, makes me think differently or just provides different tools for different situations. So I value everything that you brought today and just appreciate you all making the time to come on.
Yeah. Thanks, JP and Mackenzie. And I think we probably have a half a dozen different time zones from all across the world represented here. So to find a way to make this work is pretty impressive.
All right, that's it for the second part of our live Q&A of Ask Us Anything. If you want to be on a future Ask Us Anything live recording, well, you need to be subscribed and reading our weekly newsletter. The newsletter shares a weekly article with practical tools and advice on building team culture, discounts on our online courses, and yes, unique opportunities like being on a live podcast recording with us. So thank you for listening in to the Coaching Culture podcast, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast as well as the Culture Builders podcast. Check that one out there. When you find these episodes to be valuable, we always encourage you, share it with some friends in coaching. It's a great way to start a conversation, and that conversation could lead to a lot of impact, a lot of influence in others in your community.